Hi, this is James Cook of the University of Maine at Augusta, where I serve as an associate professor of sociology. I'm recording this video to talk about research and to talk in particular about research method. Why do we need a particular method for research? Why can't we simply look at what is around us in the world? One way to answer this question is to think about it in terms of the perception we have of the world. Ed Yong has written a really interesting book recently, a piece of science journalism called An Immense World. And in his introduction to this, he talks about a number of different animals and imagines them in a large room together. An elephant, a mouse, a robin, an owl, a bat, a rattlesnake, a spider, a mosquito, a bumblebee, and then a human. So he thinks about what the room is to each of these animals, including the human animal. And he notes, based on what scientists have observed about sensation, the following differences. In terms of smell, elephants detect smell in greater detail than humans, with 5 times as many olfactory receptors. Rattlesnakes are also really good at smelling the trails of animals in ways that humans can't. Mosquitoes would smell something else. They'd smell the carbon dioxide emitted by the other animals. So those are things that humans wouldn't notice, but also differences between those 3 animals. In terms of hearing, elephants emit low-pitched rumbles that mice and bats can't hear because they hear in the upper range. And a rattlesnake, however, is going to be able to sense that, but it senses it as vibration in its belly because rattlesnakes are really good at detecting vibration. A mouse is going to deliver these ultrasonic, really high-pitched squeaks that humans just can't hear. Robins are going to sing so fast that humans can't hear all the detail in the speed of a robin's song, but other robins would hear it. Owls can hear very quiet sounds that sound like nothing at all to humans, so they could hear the pitter-patter of those mouse feet. As Ed Yong continues to describe what's going on, he moves on to bats, and he points out bats can echolocate things by sending out sound and then hearing changes in how that sound comes back in echoes, something that humans have a very poor sense of. We do have a rudimentary sense of it, but in not as great a detail as a bat. When it comes to vision, a nocturnal snake, at least, can't see that well with its eyes, but it can detect shapes through their heat. Is that vision? If you detect shapes, possibly, but it's certainly experienced in a different way. Appearance can change. The robin, the bird, its chest looks red to a human, hence robin redbreast. But it would look yellow to an elephant, which can't perceive the red, and it would look gray to a bumblebee. However, a bumblebee looking at a sunflower would see a bullseye shape, and by that would be invisible to a human. The human looks at that flower, it just sees a pretty yellow flower with a brown center. So the snakes, as we pointed out, sense vibrations really well in order to find prey. But there's another animal in the room that can do the same, a spider in its spider web. It may not have really good hearing. Its eyes may not be able to pick up all the detail of the room. However, when something lands in its web, it can detect through the vibrations and the pattern of vibrations, not just that something has hit the web, but what that is, and therefore can make decisions about how to respond to it in ways that people just couldn't. Then there are senses that we just have really no purchase on unless we use technology to augment our own senses. What I'm meaning in particular is the example of the robin, which, like many migratory birds, can detect magnetic fields. So it knows which direction is north and which is south, and then it can make all kinds of decisions about what direction to go in to migrate well. Scientists still haven't figured out how that works, but it does exist. So Ed Yong takes all these animals in one room and points out that they're really not seeing or smelling or tasting or otherwise sensing the same room. He puts it like this, and I'm quoting him now, quote, "Earth teems with sights and textures, sounds and vibrations, smells and tastes, electric and magnetic fields. But every animal, can only tap into a small fraction of reality's fullness. Each is enclosed within its own unique sensory bubble, perceiving but a tiny sliver of an immense world. That's a humbling thought, and it gets even more humbling when you make a consideration within species. So within humans, we could make a bold declaration that if you want to see what kind of color is around you, what kind of color you might have, you might say, oh, well, this is clearly black. You can just look at it. This is white. You might say a clown's nose is red. However, scientists that have looked at color perception have noticed that from human to human to human to human, actually, our senses of what it is that we perceive, our ability to perceive color, it varies. So there are people who are red-green colorblind. They can't tell the difference. And there are some people who will look at a color and call it blue, and other people will look at the same color and they'll call it green. On top of that, right? So you can't just look out in the world and say, oh, I see this and I call it this color, therefore that is the color that it is. On top of that, we have the problem of the idea of an object having a color, right? Like, for instance, a bridge. You might say a bridge that is spanning a river has a particular color. How do you know? You just look at it and you sense the color of the bridge. Well, an Impressionist painter, Claude Monet, put the lie to that. He exposed that by painting a series of 41 paintings of the same bridge from the same vantage point. Why did he paint 41 different paintings of the same bridge, the Waterloo Bridge? The answer is that he did it because, depending on the time of day, depending upon the humidity in the air, the smoke let out by engines, the location of the sun in the sky, the bridge looked different. It had different colors. It had different contrasts to the colors around it. So Monet is finding out through making those paintings, and then we can find out by looking at those paintings, that actually it can be very hard to say whether an object has a consistent color or not, because color is actually something that emerges from the environment around the object and the things that interact with it. Oh my goodness. So that Monet calls this envelope. It's the thing that surrounds an object. That complicates things as well. And Monet is pointing out that even if we're talking about not just humanity, and not just one human, but within one human, a heck of a lot of variation in the colors they see, and therefore the colors, if they're a good painter, that they would paint. So, Jakob von Uexkull, in the early 20th century, a little bit more than 100 years ago, comes up with a word for this, and he's German. So he calls it Umwelt, which is the unique sensation that any observer has based on their capacity to understand the world through their sensation, and then the envelope of those things that surround the object being observed. Umwelt is a compound word, like so many German words are. Welt is world. Is around, and it means the world around one. And by coining this word, Umwelt, to describe this idea, what Jakob von Uexkull is trying to say is that the method of observation that every different animal species has, or that different individuals within a species have, is going to change the effective world in which they operate. Wow. What that means, in short, is that simply walking around consistently in your own human body as a particular human and seeing something, perceiving something, doesn't mean, number one, that that's all there is to perceive to that object, that it is simply that way, and that there's not something you haven't seen, and that might not change, even though the object itself doesn't change, because the around you and the object is going to change. Goodness. So that means you shouldn't simply trust your immediate observations. What you need is a method for figuring out the difference between what you perceive and what else might be there. And if you think about social research, the stakes get a lot higher, because we have, in addition to these physical senses, we also have a set of cultural senses, a set of ideas that could be beliefs about the way the world is and how it works that influence, therefore, what we see. It could be values about what is good or bad and therefore affect how we perceive things in the world that we might value as good or bad, and also expectations for behavior. What we expect something to do, and therefore what we report that something does, might be based in those expectations. And those are all carried by culture. So given all those problems, what do we do? One answer is to get systematic. Martin Heidegger is, again, 20th century, also German, a philosopher. And he distinguishes, in a way that has more complexity than I'm going to describe here, between these two words, Vorhandenheit and Zuhandenheit. The Vorhandenheit is, Heit just means being. Handen refers to the hands. Vorhandenheit is what we simply encounter. What's around us. So the things we place around us are what we might encounter. And that can also vary. Based on where you are in the world, you will find more things are simply present at hand. As an English speaker in the United States, I am much more likely to encounter other people who speak English than a person who lives halfway around the world, say in Malaysia. Although a lot of English speakers are in Malaysia too, the probability is different. I'm not going to hear much Malay in the state of Maine here in the United States in the Northeast. It's going to be a very rare thing to hear indeed. And so my understanding of what the world is like is going to be different based on what is at hand around me in terms of the sounds. And then therefore the conclusions I draw are going to be different. So we have to think about what is around us compared to what is not even present to us. And then we have to think about how we would perceive it differently and how variation in perception might mean we're missing out on something. Fortunately, Heidegger says there's another word called Zuhandenheit. And the idea is that there are things that are ready to hand, not at hand, but to hand, meaning zu, to, handen, heit being. So something that can be used. The set of tools are things that we can amass around us and bring to bear. So you can think of social research methods, or any research methods really more broadly, as the enterprise of bringing a number of tools to hand. These are special tools that allow us to do a number of things. They allow us to see far outside our immediate environment to other places. They allow us to see things at a different scale than we might otherwise observe, either the very small or the very large. And they allow us to see different kinds of things that our eyes, our nose, our fingers just can't literally touch, that they can't perceive. And then there's another set of tools. So those are observational tools. And then there are analytic tools for how we take that information, which our brains just intuitively get a kind of jazz-like sense, improvisationally learning how to deal with that information, right? A baby can't figure it out, but then as you grow, you get better and figure out your sight, your smell, your taste, and how to work with it. Well, the analytic methods of a research methodology are all about doing that, but doing it systematically and paying attention to what the consequences are of making a choice in how you observe and how you analyze what you observe, how you take it apart into its constituent pieces and observe how those pieces interrelate. That's what analysis is. Lysis means to split things apart into their constituent pieces. Putting that all together, we live in, Ed Yong is right, an immense world. In that immense world, there's so much that we can't see as humans. There's so much that we can't perceive, that we don't even have a name for, a sense for. And so we should be humble. There's variability within humanity in terms of what people will see, what people will see with their senses, and what people will perceive and feel is present based on their cultural expectations and values and beliefs. And we should respect that. And given that, if we want to understand the world around us, not just the world that is obvious, but the world that is not obvious, we should assemble a set of tools around us, Zuhandenheit, that allows us to more accurately measure the world and to take what we measure and to work with it to understand how those things we measure work. That's what research methods is all about. And when you think about it that way, to take a class in research methods is really a gift. It's like taking on a superpower. It's like being able to get the echolocation of a bat. It's like being able to smell the chemical traces that a mosquito can, to see the patterns in flowers that otherwise would not be there. All sorts of other things that would surprise you because they're unexpected. So even if you don't become a researcher in the end, and maybe I can convince you by the end of a course to do just that, but even if you never become a researcher, I hope that you will walk away from a research methods class with a richer understanding of the world around you, a bit of humility about the limits to what you can perceive, and an increased sense about what it is possible for us to see or measure and to understand through analysis, if we will only be careful, pay attention, and assemble the right tools around us.